In the interview, Trump said presidents can declassify documents just by, quote, thinking about it.
You had said on Truth Social a number of times you did declassify.
I did declassify, yes.
Okay. Is there a process? What was your process to declassify?
There doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. You know, there's different people say different things, but as I understand, there doesn't have to be. If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it, because you're sending it to Mar-a-Lago or to wherever you're sending it. And there doesn't have to be a process. There can be a process, but there doesn't have to be. You're the president. You make that decision. So when you send it, it's declassified. I declassified everything.
Okay, so what just happened in that courtroom is absolutely historic, and I need you to understand that this might be the moment that decides everything in Trump's legal saga. A private investigator working with prosecutors just played a secret recording of President Trump, and on that tape, Trump admits that the documents are still secret. Those are his exact words captured on audio: still secret, not declassified like he's been claiming for years, not something he had the right to have in his possession. Secret documents that he knew were secret when he had them sitting at Mar-a-Lago for anyone to access. The courtroom reaction was unlike anything legal observers have ever witnessed in a case of this magnitude and importance. There was stunned silence as the recording played through the speakers, and then audible gasps from jurors and spectators when they heard Trump's own voice admitting what his lawyers have spent months desperately denying. Multiple witnesses described the atmosphere as electric with shock. People genuinely couldn't believe what they were hearing from Trump's own mouth on that recording. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
President Trump continues to lash out against the Democratic lawmakers who posted a video last week simply reminding members of the military that they do not have to obey illegal orders. The president...
Well, it's actually, they can't obey illegal orders.
Right.
It's against the
part of their training to know that. The president took to social media over the weekend to double down on his accusation that their message, which is actually consistent with the military oath of enlistment, qualifies as, quote, sedition at the highest level. He also shared a series of posts from other Truth Social users, slamming the lawmakers and calling for them to be punished. It's dangerous. In an interview on Friday, the president insisted he wasn't threatening members of Congress when he said their behavior was, quote, punishable by death.
This recording doesn't just damage Trump's defense, it completely and utterly obliterates it beyond any hope of recovery. For months, Trump's legal team has been arguing that he believed everything was declassified, that presidents have absolute authority to declassify documents just by thinking about it or waving their hand, that Trump genuinely thought he had the right to possess these materials after leaving office. That was their entire strategy from day one, creating reasonable doubt by suggesting Trump didn't know he was doing anything wrong when he took those boxes to Florida. Well, you can't claim your client thought the documents were declassified when there's audio of him saying they're still secret. Trump's own words destroyed his own defense in real time, right there in the courtroom for the jury to hear with their own ears. There's no coming back from that kind of devastating admission captured on tape. Legal analysts are calling this a smoking gun, unlike anything they've seen in their entire careers covering high-profile cases. One expert said this is case-breaking evidence with historic implications that will be studied for decades. Another said Trump's entire defense strategy just collapsed the moment that recording played through the courtroom speakers for everyone to hear. The devastating content goes even further than just the admission about documents being secret. The transcript shows Trump acknowledging that he should have declassified some materials, but didn't actually do it when he had the chance. Think about what that means for his legal defense. Trump is on tape admitting he knew the proper process for declassification existed. He knew he should have followed that process while he was still president, and he chose not to follow it for whatever reason. That's not a misunderstanding about presidential authority or complex legal requirements. That's not confusion about what presidents can and cannot do with classified materials. That's knowing the rules existed and deliberately ignoring them because he thought he could get away with it. The investigator who gathered this recording did so legally while working directly with prosecutors on the case. This wasn't some illegally obtained evidence that defense attorneys can get thrown out on procedural grounds or constitutional violations. This was a professional investigation conducted within proper legal bounds that produced legally admissible evidence that's now part of the official court record forever. The jury heard it with their own ears. they can consider it fully in their deliberations when deciding Trump's fate. And there's absolutely nothing Trump's lawyers can do to unring that bell now that it's been played in open court. Can you believe this? The entire defense that Trump's team spent months building, all the arguments about declassification authority, all the claims about Trump's good faith beliefs, all the attempts to create reasonable doubt in jurors' minds, all of it evaporated completely in the time it took to play a recording lasting just a few minutes. Jury members reportedly showed visible shock at Trump's own words admitting what he denied for so long. These are ordinary citizens who've been sitting through weeks of testimony and legal arguments, trying to sort through competing claims about what Trump knew and when he knew it. And then they hear Trump himself settling the question definitively with his own voice. He knew the documents were secret. He admitted it on tape. Case closed as far as that central factual question is concerned. Legal experts are already predicting this recording could guarantee conviction. And that's not typical legal analysts hedging or cautious speculation. You usually hear from experts, that's experienced observers, looking at the evidence presented and concluding that Trump has virtually no path to acquittal. Now that this tape exists and has been played for the jury, when the defendant is caught on tape admitting the key element of the crime he's charged with, the defense options narrow to almost nothing viable. The implications extend far beyond just this criminal case and Trump's immediate legal jeopardy. A conviction based on this evidence will permanently alter Trump's legal and political fate going forward. He would be a convicted felon, the first former president in American history to hold that shameful distinction. His political future would be dramatically complicated, though his most loyal supporters would undoubtedly spin the conviction as persecution rather than justice being served. The recording also increases pressure on everyone in Trump's orbit who may have exposure in related matters involving these documents. When evidence this strong emerges against a central figure, people facing potential charges start calculating whether loyalty to Trump is worth risking their own freedom and futures. Plea deals become more attractive overnight. Cooperation with prosecutors becomes more appealing than holding the line. The walls closing in on Trump tend to close in on everyone around him too. So we're going to break down exactly what this recording contains, how the investigator obtained it legally, why it's so devastating to Trump's defense strategy, and what happens next as this case moves toward what appears to be an inevitable conviction. This is the kind of evidence that changes history, a former president caught on tape admitting to the crime he's charged with committing. You're going to want to understand every single detail of how this moment came together and what it means. All right, let's dig into the details of this recording, because understanding exactly what Trump said in the context around it reveals why legal experts are calling this moment historic and case-breaking for the prosecution. We need to start with what the recording actually captured, because the specific words Trump used are absolutely devastating to every defense his lawyers have attempted to mount throughout this entire prosecution. On the tape, Trump discusses the classified documents in his possession and makes a statement that has now become the centerpiece of the prosecution's entire case against him. He says the documents are still secret. Those three words, still secret, carry enormous legal weight because they directly contradict everything Trump and his lawyers have been claiming publicly and in court filings for months and years. Trump's primary defense has always centered completely on declassification arguments. His lawyers argue repeatedly that as president, Trump had absolute authority to declassify any document simply by deciding to do so in his mind. They claim Trump exercised that authority, either explicitly or implicitly, before leaving office in January 2021. They suggested that Trump genuinely believed the documents were declassified and therefore had every legal right to possess them at Mar-a-Lago after his presidency ended. That defense requires the jury to believe Trump thought the documents were no longer classified when he took them. But you can't maintain that argument when there's a recording of Trump himself acknowledging the documents are still secret. If Trump believed the documents were declassified as he claimed, he wouldn't describe them as still secret on tape. His own words prove definitively that he knew the classification status hadn't changed despite his public claims otherwise. The recording goes even further in destroying Trump's legal position and any hope of acquittal. According to legal analysts who reviewed the transcript carefully, Trump acknowledges that he should have declassified some materials but didn't actually do it when he had the authority. This admission is absolutely fatal to the defense strategy his lawyers constructed. Trump is essentially confessing on tape that he knew the proper declassification process existed and was available to him. He understood he should have followed that process while still in office, and he failed to follow it despite knowing better. That's not innocent confusion about complex legal requirements that reasonable people might misunderstand. That's not a good faith belief that he had authority he actually lacked as president. That's Trump admitting clearly that he knew the rules and chose not to follow them anyway. In legal terms, this establishes both knowledge and intent simultaneously, the two hardest elements for prosecutors to prove in most criminal cases involving document mishandling. Usually prosecutors have to build circumstantial cases showing the defendant probably knew what they were doing was wrong and illegal. They present evidence of training sessions attended, warnings received, advice from lawyers ignored, patterns of behavior that suggest awareness of wrongdoing. Defense attorneys then create reasonable doubt by offering alternative explanations for everything. Maybe the defendant didn't understand the complex rules. Maybe they got bad advice from staff. Maybe they genuinely believed they were acting legally the whole time. The recording eliminates all of that back and forth argumentation because Trump himself settles the question of what he knew and when. He knew the documents were secret despite his claims. He knew he should have declassified them through proper channels. He didn't do it when he had the chance. That's the whole case right there, delivered by the defendant himself in his own voice and words. The private investigator who obtained this recording was working legally with prosecutors on the case throughout the investigation. This is extremely important because it means the evidence was gathered through proper legal channels and is fully admissible in court without procedural challenges. Defense attorneys often attack recordings by arguing they were obtained illegally or in violation of the defendant's constitutional rights against self-incrimination. Those challenges won't work here because the investigator was operating entirely within legal bounds as part of the prosecution's official investigation into Trump's handling of classified materials. The circumstances of how Trump came to make these damning statements are still being detailed by legal observers, but the recording appears to capture a conversation where Trump was speaking candidly about the document situation, perhaps not realizing he was being recorded or not thinking the recording would ever become public evidence against him. Trump has a well-documented history of speaking carelessly in situations where he assumes privacy and confidentiality. The Access Hollywood tape that emerged during the 2016 campaign, the phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, pressuring him to find votes, previous recordings about classified documents at his golf club. This pattern suggests Trump doesn't fully internalize the risks of speaking freely, even when his words could create serious legal exposure for himself and others. The courtroom reaction when this recording played tells you absolutely everything about its devastating impact on the case. Multiple witnesses described audible gasps from jurors, people who've been carefully trained to remain neutral and unemotional during trial proceedings, reacting viscerally and involuntarily to what they heard from Trump's mouth. The silence that preceded those gasps was described as absolute and almost suffocating. Everyone in the room frozen completely, processing the enormous significance of Trump's words and what they meant for the case. Legal observers who've covered hundreds of trials over decades said they never seen a courtroom react that way to evidence presentation before. The jury's visible shock is extremely significant because it suggests the recording landed with the devastating impact prosecutors hoped for and planned around. Jurors are human beings despite instructions to remain impartial, and when they hear a defendant essentially confess to the crime on tape, it creates an impression that's extremely difficult to overcome through legal arguments, cross-examination, or closing statements. Defense attorneys can try to contextualize, minimize, or reframe what was said, but they can't unsay it or make jurors forget what they heard. The words are on the record permanently now, and jurors will remember them vividly during deliberations when deciding Trump's guilt or innocence. Trump's defense team is in a completely impossible position following this revelation in open court. Their entire strategy centered on declassification claims and Trump's alleged good faith belief that he had authority to possess these documents legally. The recording proves Trump knew the documents were still classified and knew he should have followed proper procedures, but didn't bother. There's no pivot available that addresses this evidence effectively or neutralizes its impact. The defense can try to argue the recording is somehow incomplete or taken out of context, but the words "still secret" don't have an innocent alternative meaning in context of discussing classified documents. They can try to minimize the significance by arguing Trump was speaking loosely or didn't mean it literally, but that's a desperately weak argument when the statement is so clear and directly relevant to the exact charges he faces. They can try to attack the credibility of the investigator who obtained the recording, but that doesn't change what Trump said on the tape itself, his voice, his words, his admission. Some legal observers are speculating that this evidence could push toward a plea agreement rather than continuing to trial and risking an even worse outcome. When the evidence against you includes your own recorded confession to the central elements of the crime, the calculus about going to trial changes dramatically and immediately. A trial means this recording gets played publicly over and over, replayed constantly in media coverage, analyzed by commentators on every network, and seared permanently into public consciousness and historical memory. A plea might allow some control over the narrative and potentially a reduced sentence compared to what a jury might impose after hearing Trump admit guilt in his own words on that devastating tape. But Trump has never in his entire life shown willingness to admit wrongdoing or accept responsibility for anything he's done, so a plea seems unlikely regardless of how overwhelming the evidence becomes against him. More likely, Trump will rage against the recording as fake or manipulated, claim it's been doctored or taken out of context by corrupt prosecutors, attack the investigator as a deep state operative, and take his chances with the jury while hoping for some miracle that lets him escape accountability once again, like he's done so many times before. The broader implications of this recording extend well beyond Trump's individual case and personal legal jeopardy. This evidence strengthens prosecutors' positions dramatically in any related cases involving co-defendants or associates who may have helped Trump retain or conceal these classified documents from authorities. When the central figure is caught on tape admitting knowledge and intent, everyone around him faces massively increased pressure to cooperate rather than go down with the sinking ship. We could see additional plea deals and cooperation agreements flowing from this evidence as Trump's allies reassess their situations and calculate their own best interests. The political implications heading into 2026 are equally significant and far-reaching. A conviction based on this recording would make Trump a convicted felon, a historic and shameful first for any former president in American history. His political future would be complicated, though not necessarily ended completely, as his most devoted base has shown willingness to support him, regardless of legal troubles or criminal convictions. But the image of Trump on tape, admitting to possessing secret documents he knew he shouldn't have, is incredibly powerful and will be replayed constantly in political advertising and media coverage through the 2026 elections and beyond for years to come. Okay, let's break this down into clear points so everyone understands exactly why this recording is so devastating and what it means for Trump's legal and political future going forward. Point number 1, Trump's recorded admission that the documents are still secret destroys his entire declassification defense instantly and completely. For months and years, Trump's lawyers have argued he believed the documents were declassified and therefore had the legal right to possess them at his Florida residence. That defense required the jury to accept that Trump genuinely thought the classification status had changed through his presidential authority. The recording proves definitively that Trump knew the documents remained classified the whole time. He used the word still secret himself on tape. You absolutely cannot argue your client believed documents were declassified when there's clear audio of him acknowledging they're still secret. The admission is clear, direct, and completely impossible to explain away through any legal maneuvering or creative interpretation. Every argument Trump's lawyers carefully prepared, every expert witness they might have planned to call, every theory of the case they developed over months, all of it became completely worthless the moment that recording played in court for the jury to hear. The jury heard Trump himself settle the central factual dispute in the case with his own words and voice. There's simply no recovering from that kind of self-inflicted devastating blow to your own defense. Point number 2. The recording also shows Trump knew the proper declassification process existed and that he should have followed it but deliberately chose not to do so. This establishes both knowledge and intent simultaneously, which is extraordinary evidence for prosecutors. Trump can't claim he didn't understand the rules because he's on tape acknowledging exactly what he should have done. He can't claim he made an innocent mistake based on confusion because he's admitting he knew the right process and didn't follow it anyway. In criminal cases, proving the defendant knew their actions were wrong is often the hardest and most challenging part of the prosecution's job. Usually it requires building elaborate circumstantial cases and asking juries to infer mental state from external evidence and behavior patterns. This recording does that work for prosecutors automatically and definitively. Trump's intent and knowledge are no longer inferences requiring interpretation. They're documented facts captured clearly in his own voice on legally obtained recordings that are fully admissible. Point number 3. The jury's visible reaction suggests the recording landed with maximum devastating impact that will be extremely hard for the defense to overcome during deliberations. Jurors are instructed repeatedly to remain neutral and evaluate evidence dispassionately without emotional reactions. But they're human beings with normal human responses, and when they hear a defendant essentially confess to the crime they're accused of committing, it creates powerful impressions that shape how they view everything else presented in the case. The gasp and shocked silence described by multiple courtroom observers indicate jurors understood immediately what they were hearing and its significance. Defense attorneys can try to contextualize or minimize Trump's words during closing arguments, but they're fighting against the visceral emotional impact of hearing the defendant's own voice admitting guilt on tape. Studies consistently show that recordings carry particular weight with juries because they feel more reliable and trustworthy than testimony, which can be challenged as biased, mistaken, or self-serving. Trump's lawyers faced the nearly impossible challenge of somehow convincing jurors to disbelieve or discount what they heard clearly with their own ears. Point number 4. The private investigator obtained this recording legally while working with prosecutors, making it fully admissible and completely immune to common defense challenges on procedural grounds. Defense attorneys often attack recordings by arguing they were obtained illegally, that the defendant's constitutional rights were violated, or that proper procedures weren't followed during evidence gathering. None of those challenges work here because the investigator was operating entirely within legal bounds as part of the prosecution's official investigation. The recording is properly authenticated, legally obtained through proper channels, and fully admissible as evidence the jury can consider in reaching their verdict. There's no procedural escape hatch or technicality for Trump's lawyers to exploit that might exclude this devastating evidence from consideration. Point number 5. This evidence increases pressure enormously on everyone in Trump's orbit to consider cooperation rather than continued loyalty to a sinking ship. When evidence this strong emerges against a central figure in an alleged conspiracy, everyone else involved starts immediately recalculating their options and legal exposure. Loyalty to Trump was already a risky proposition given his well-documented history of discarding allies when they become inconvenient or problematic for him. Now that loyalty means potentially going down alongside someone who's been caught on tape admitting guilt in his own words and voice. Prosecutors will use this recording as powerful leverage in negotiations with co-defendants and potential witnesses who might be wavering. The message is crystal clear. Trump is going down based on this evidence, and anyone who helped him has the choice of cooperating now for a better deal or holding out stubbornly and facing the full weight of prosecution alongside someone whose guilt is now documented permanently on tape. We should expect to see additional cooperation agreements and plea deals emerge in coming weeks as Trump's remaining allies reassess their positions carefully. Point number 6. Legal experts are predicting this recording could guarantee conviction, making this a truly historic turning point in American legal history. Legal analysts don't typically make such strong and confident predictions because trials are inherently uncertain with many unpredictable variables. Juries can surprise you with unexpected verdicts. Evidence can be interpreted different ways by different people. Reasonable doubt is a real barrier that prosecutors must overcome, regardless of how strong their case appears on paper. But when experienced experts start using words like guarantee and case breaking to describe evidence, it signals they believe the prosecution has achieved something truly extraordinary here. The recording removes virtually all uncertainty about the central factual questions in the case that the jury must decide. Did Trump know the documents were classified when he had them? Yes, he said clearly they're still secret. Did he know he should have followed proper procedures for declassification? Yes, he admitted on tape he should have declassified them, but didn't actually do it. Did he have criminal intent when retaining these materials? The recording establishes exactly that intent beyond reasonable doubt through his own admission. So where does this leave us right now? Trump is facing what legal experts are calling the most devastating evidence ever presented against a former president in any criminal prosecution in American history. His own recorded words prove definitively that he knew the documents were still classified and that he failed to follow proper declassification procedures despite knowing he should have. His defense team's entire strategy has collapsed completely, and they have no viable path to rebuild it in time to save their client from conviction. The jury has heard Trump essentially admit guilt in his own voice, creating powerful impressions that will be nearly impossible to overcome through legal argument alone, no matter how skilled his attorneys might be. The recording is legally obtained and fully admissible, leaving defense lawyers with no procedural challenges that could exclude it from the jury's consideration. Everyone in Trump's orbit now faces massively increased pressure to cooperate with prosecutors as the evidence against their leader becomes truly overwhelming and undeniable. This is what accountability looks like when it finally arrives after years of delay and denial. For years, Trump has escaped consequences through delay tactics, deflection, and the sheer audacity of denying what everyone can see with their own eyes. But recordings don't care about political spin or aggressive denials. Recordings don't respond to attacks on prosecutors or claims of witch hunts. Recordings simply play back what was said, and what Trump said was that the documents are still secret and he should have declassified them, but didn't do it. The implications for Trump's political future are equally significant and potentially devastating. A conviction based on this evidence will make him the first former president in American history to be convicted of a felony, a shameful distinction that will define his legacy forever. His ability to run for office, his standing with moderate voters, his historical reputation, all of it changes dramatically if this recording leads to the conviction that experts are now confidently predicting will happen. This is a turning point, not just for Trump's case, but for American legal history itself. The principle that no one is above the law faces its ultimate test when applied to a former president with this level of power and influence. This recording provides the kind of clear, undeniable evidence that makes that principle meaningful rather than merely aspirational rhetoric. Trump knew what he was doing was wrong. He did it anyway because he thought he could get away with it. He got caught on tape admitting everything, and now he faces the consequences that would apply to any other American who committed these same crimes. Keep watching this case closely because the verdict that follows this evidence will shape American politics and legal precedent for generations to come. Are you kidding me? This is the smoking gun that could finally bring real accountability to someone who's escaped it his entire life.